on this computer. Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on this problem solving panel. So we're just kind of talk about problem solving and how it's changed throughout the years and why it's important, and what we can kind of do to help build that skill set. So problem solving, if you just simply Google a definition, the process of finding solutions to difficult or complex issues. So we're going to focus today on why it's such an essential skill to have and how it can kind of help us grow as people. So I'll start off with how exactly does sharpening problem-solving skills build resiliency? We hear this word, you want to build resiliency a lot these days. So how does problem-solving build that? I'll start with you, Tiffany, and then we can head over to Sonia.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I love this question a lot, actually, because resiliency has become a key feature of something that I'm consistently evaluating in the counseling room. After doing some research on this particular word and the topic is particularly amongst teens currently, I learned that there is a direct, unanimously found correlation between positive and better good mental health and resiliency being higher. So in light of that information, it's problem solving becomes a key feature then of how to go about building resilience, right? Because one of the paramount factors is the ability to overcome. And if someone can overcome something difficult, there clearly indicates a problem, but the only way to overcome it is by problem solving one's way through it first, right? Yeah. And in doing so, another key feature is the ability to adapt and flex. I think one guarantee we have in life is that things aren't going to stay the same and that problems are going to come. I mean, I think we can expect it, right? So being able to flex and adapt when those happen becomes something that we must do. I like to use the example of a willow tree often and the way it looks in the wind when the strong winds come. A tree that's really healthy, it bends and it turns and it waves, but a dead, dried up tree is going to break when the elements come along, right? So I like that visual of something that can adapt and flex when the things happen. Another key feature was the ability to bounce back. So how quickly from a problem is someone going to be sitting in the muck and the whatever that's going on? How quickly are they going to see different ways to look at it and then take action on that and then bounce back to a pre-loss or pre-problem situation?
Right.
And all of these, the good mental health and resiliency is bidirectional. So meaning, if your resiliency is up, your good mental health is going to be stronger, right? Like, and these keep going back and forth. And in order to build that as a strength feature, you have to have a lot of positive experiences, right? So that requires action, and sometimes that requires support in order to develop that strength. But in problem solving, resilience is something that, like I said, I'm always looking for. I'm trying to assess how hard I can push, when the right time is to push, and then help them understand that they will be okay and survive on the other side.
Yeah. And I love how you first said that problem solving, like in life, problems are going to arise. Like we have to be prepared for that and ready for that. And then that visual of the tree, that is, I'm going to use that. Like that is such a good visual, because you're right. Like the willow tree, especially when the elements hit it, it bends and sways. And that's kind of what we are hoping for ourselves as well. Yeah. Sonia, did you want to add to that?
I really would. I love that visual too, Tiffany. And we're going to talk at the end a little bit more about children and resiliency. But I just want to give a very personal example, because I think people need to know that, as mental health professionals, we've had struggles and we still have them today. And so, part of the issue with resiliency is that when we are low in resiliency, low in problem solving skills, we often see a lot of anxiety. And so as someone who has struggled with the anxiety my entire life, part of that comes from a lack of experience and positive experience with solving problems and troubleshooting. And I grew up in a home, God bless my parents, they did their best, but problems were bad and to be gotten rid of quickly. There was no conversation where anybody ever sat me down and said, hey, so what do you think you should do? And how do you want to do this? And let me coach you through this. There was a problem. There was immediate anxiety in the house. What do you mean you failed a test? What do you mean? Go fix it, go do something about it. And so this idea that a problem is bad and that I couldn't do it myself because I had a parent who jumped in and solved it for me, it left me feeling helpless and afraid. And so, you're going to pick up on that anxiety. It is now in my life, at the second half of life where I'm continuing to learn. First of all, you got this. You're in charge of your life. You can do this. There might be some risk involved. So learning that we develop some toughness, we develop some grit, that's normal. And the more you practice problem solving and failing, and that's something I'll talk about at the end too, the better you get at it. And so this initial idea of, oh my gosh, something's wrong, anxiety, the deer in the headlights has now turned to, oh, I can actually do this. I will survive something that's difficult in my life. And I see clients all the time who are just stuck in that anxiety of, I don't know what to do. And so when we can pause and kind of game out, well, you have options, by the way. Right. It's not just about either stay in the relationship and be, consumed with fear the rest of your life or leave immediately. There are different ways that you can solve these problems.
Right. So I think it's important too, because you talked about in that story, well, thank you for sharing that story about your life. You talked about your parents and, they did the best that they knew how to do. And obviously the way that we approach things now, especially in parenthood, is maybe a little different than then. But there have been a lot of changes over the last 20, 30 years, especially when thinking about problem solving. So I kind of want to talk about what are some of the biggest differences between like what problem solving looked like 20, 30 years ago and what it looks like now. And I'm going to head over to Jenny for this one.
Yay. Yeah. So I was thinking about this. I was talking to my grandparents recently. So for context, they got married when they were like, gosh, my grandmother was 19, my grandpa was like 20. And then they immediately moved to Japan because my grandpa was in the Navy. So they got married and literally within a week moved across the world as newlyweds because that's easy. And they, it was forever ago. They've been married for 60 years now. And so they didn't have the internet, they couldn't bring all their encyclopedias with them. They couldn't figure out, they were in a brand new country in a brand new language. And so the way that they figured out problems in a whole new country was in community. And so they solved their problems talking to other people that were on the naval base with them. And the way that they navigated problems was through word of mouth, how other people had figured things out and made mistakes and failed up and failed down and, try to think through what works well for them and what worked for their marriage and their individual goals. And so it was interesting to talk to her and think through how they problem solved in their context and how that worked for them and didn't work for them and how scrappy and resilient it's made them. I mean, they've been married for forever. And so something's working. Compared to my husband and I, who got married, we're happily married, it's fine. But we got married and then we moved to Missouri shortly within, I think we'd been married for 6 months and moved to Missouri from New York City. And that felt like a radical move for us. And we didn't have community. And so we turned to the internet. And so we were like, how do people move to Missouri from New York City? What's in St. Louis? And so we, could talk to my grandparents about, because I was like, what did you guys do when you moved? And she said, oh, it was fine. We just figured out Japanese, no big deal. But that's not what we were working with. And so it was interesting to think through. They jumped into community and people and word of mouth and experiences that people had in real life, face to face. And our option was to jump into the internet and jump into social media and say, hey, who's lived in St. Louis? How do you do this here? And kind of like information gather based on resources online. And we were able to find a lot of different options really quickly. So it was kind of like an information overload because there was so much information out there versus my grandparents who had a lot limited information, but kind of had to do the best they could with what they have. And so when I'm thinking about problem solving, I would imagine, I don't have the strict data on this, but when I talk to my people in my generation, we expect to solve our problems pretty quickly. We expect to get the information quickly. get a wealth of information, sort through it very quickly, and come up with a solution. We don't necessarily do a great job sitting in ambiguity, sitting in indecisiveness, or that tension of like, what do we do next? Because we just have so much information at our fingertips now. Versus my grandparents, who are used to sitting in that tension and kind of thinking through, well, we'll try this time because this person said that would work, and kind of sitting in that process and that tension more so. So those are just some things that I thought of initially about how we've changed the way we think about problem solving.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great story and a great, that is just so crazy. I can't imagine moving to Japan. I can't imagine moving to a different country at all anyway, just because community is big for me. And so that would be terrifying. But I think that you're right. And we'll kind of touch on this a little bit more when we talk about kids, but I think that kids too now they expect to solve their problems immediately, because this is just how it is. When you look something up, you have a bunch of answers, but then they don't always know like not the correct, but with your grandparents, they had people they trusted that they talked to solve their problems, and what worked for you and what didn't. Well, with the internet, it's like you don't know what's trustworthy and what's not. And so it's just very interesting, the differences between the generations now and what they were. So
I would just love to add too, if I could, Alyssa, that I think, Ginny, I was just reading something about the importance of communities that are intergenerational. We tend to see like people in their second half of life or in their last 10th of life as, okay, well, thanks so much. And we're going to put you over here in the corner of the room. What do you really know? But the experiences that they've had that are world experiences, life experiences, are so valuable, and if those of us in whatever part of life we're in, would be more willing to seek advice and to kind of listen to counsel of people. Maybe they don't understand technology, but they certainly still understand something about humans. It also reduces our own anxiety again, knowing, oh, someone has gone before me. So I think that's just so important.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a great point. So, we're talking about how important problem solving is and resiliency and all these things. What if someone now is listening to this and they're thinking, well, what can I do? How do I become better? Like this might be something, maybe I'm having a lot of anxiety, maybe my problem solving, my resiliency, that's the root of it. Maybe I need to practice some things or do some things in my life to help sharpen those skills. So do you have any suggestions, Tiffany, on what we could do or things we could do to incorporate into our lives to help develop those skills?
Yeah, something that came to mind while Jenny was talking actually is the word expectations, I think, because as you were speaking, I was thinking about that waiting period that teenagers or maybe young adults haven't had to endure. And so I think if you're going into the idea of problem solving with some expectations that this might be uncomfortable at times, that you might have to wait, you might not wait at all. And to know that no matter what the outcome is or what the journey is going to be, having a mindset that growth in it is actually good. The waiting actually can have a positive effect, whether it's growing patience and it develops character, right? So whenever we enter into starting something, that what are your expectations and what's your mental attitude going into it? If you're going into it thinking that you're not going to succeed, there's a good chance you won't. So, but if you set those expectations, this might be difficult, that good, do that, it'll set you up well. So the only way to do that then is to develop some healthy level of self-awareness, knowing when the anxieties are rising, knowing what kinds of problems in the first place are something that you either don't have the information that you need, you might need support in getting it done. Just knowing how to assess for that and inside of yourself, and knowing what to look for there. So think feelings, thoughts, beliefs, that sort of thing. Another thing in tying back the resiliency factor is how can you go about assessing your resilience yourself? Maybe even if you just take a general health inventory, starting with your biology and physical self, how are you doing there? How are you doing in your mental and emotional health? Do you need to seek support from a coach or from a counselor, from a pastor, or from a friend? How is your social life going? Do you have the support that you need with family? If not, can you find it in other resources? And even spiritual health, if that's something that you care about as well. Like, spiritual health can be a very positive factor towards mental health as well. So assessing for that, and assessing for how resilient you are in each of those categories, can be a good place to start. So knowing yourself, essentially. And something that Sonia already touched on that I just think is so important is trying hard things and knowing that failing is part of the process. I love Bob Goff. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him and his writings, but something that he says is to fail well, and in order to do so, fail trying and not watching. So I love that, because you're guaranteed an outcome, right? By not trying, you're guaranteed something. But if you try and you fail, at least you're failing forward. You're failing. You can learn. You reevaluate. You assess. You make adjustments. There's that word again. And then you can potentially try something new. And our brains are so plastic. We can learn so much. So that thing that seems really impossible isn't as impossible as you think it might be. Just try the next thing and see what happens. And then I would say a little bit towards the end, just, a plan is important. Like, have some kind of plan. That's what problem solving is about, and if you have to adjust the steps along the way, that's okay. That's what you do. You add steps, you take them away. But having a plan to start out with, and just sort of knowing how to prioritize it, that might be something you can do well on your own. And that might be something that you can bring in an expert or bring in someone who's well rehearsed in that topic to help walk you through it. So
yeah, those are some great points. So as adults, we know that we have to be flexible. We need to make a plan. We need to do these things. And, a lot of times as adults, some of us are better at assessing what we need in order to meet the goal that we want to get to. So, but as children, let's think about that. Children, a lot of children, teens, they went through a period of time in their lives that was, different than anyone living now has gone through. They kind of had a wrench thrown into their trajectory. So with COVID, so how, as parents or as people who guide children, how can we help children build that resiliency or build those problem solving skills that we know that are so essential to growing up?
And I'd love to say a few things and then hear from the rest of you too, because you either have kids or work with them. And I think, you might have stories and example, but so I'm a parent. I have been a child. And I'm an educator, and I've worked in children's ministry for years. And I cannot express enough how important it is to help our children learn good problem solving skills, which lead to grit and resilience, which lead to lower anxiety. And about a year ago, one of our counselors, Chrissy Sturgis, and I were part of a panel that talked about this book. I highly recommend it. It's called Seen. And it's about healing despair and anxiety in kids and teens. And it specifically focuses on the power of connection. But there's a whole section in it on grit and resilience kind of being something that we have to coach and teach our kids on. There are kids who are born who have a little bit more sense of their own agency and just, that there are kids who set foot on this earth and they just kind of move forward. But then there are many kids who learn those skills at home. So the very first thing I would say to you out there who have kids or are working with them is that, and we've said this already, teach your children that problems are a part of life. I remember when I read The Road Less Traveled, I was 20 years old. And the first sentence in that book is, life is hard. And the sooner you get to accept that, the better your life will be. And I was shocked. Nobody had ever told me that. I just always assumed that problems were bad, So if you think of it statistically, probably half of your time you should be in problem solving mode, or there should be something happening that's uncomfortable, and that's okay. And then the second part of that is, and when your kids have feelings, by golly, validate those feelings. Do not tell your son to suck it up. Do not tell your children That doesn't mean they get to throw a tantrum where they hurt people or break things or, throw a fit on the baseball field, but they're going to do that, take it in stride, and try to reframe that for them. I think, Tiffany, you said something earlier about, yeah, that's hard. It sounds like you're very frustrated. Okay. You cannot talk your kids out of their feelings. And if something's happening and they're mad because they can't get through a math problem or they think their teacher doesn't like them, to tell them that they're silly or dumb, or it just makes it worse for everybody. So affirm what they're feeling and then help them game out the actions. What are your options going forward? Okay, you can't get through this math problem or you think you're going to fail this test. Well, we've got this much time left. You can throw your hands up and surrender and quit. You can work really, really hard the way you've been doing it, but are there other options? So helping your kids understand there's always other options, even if they seem kind of scary. You could go in and talk to the teacher. Well, what would that be like? So helping them game that out. And then expressing your confidence in them. Okay, I like that you made a decision. You're going to be able to, you can do this. That doesn't mean you're going to succeed the way you think, but I know you can solve this problem. And hey, you know what? If it doesn't work out the way you want it to, then we'll regroup and we'll talk about it again. So taking the anxiety off of yourself and letting them know this may work and it may not, but you're going to do the best you can at the time with the information you have. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it that way.
Right.
So just kind of doing that, allowing them to fail. But I'm going to tell you, I think in addition to all the things that we can do that we coach our kids on, the other huge factor is that we will model problem solving for them. And if you are anxious yourself and if you're communicating to your kids because something happens, oh my gosh, this is terrible, how they're going to pick up on that. So ask yourself as a parent or an educator or a coach, how am I modeling problem solving and grit and determination for the kids around me? Because if I pause and say, well, that didn't turn out the way I wanted to, but I'm going to try something else, they will pick up on that. So it's both, we're focusing on them and we're also making sure that we're modeling that too. So what about the rest of you? Do you have stories or thoughts about how we can help our kids?
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I work with a lot of adolescents and primarily adolescent girls. And so I thought of a couple of things as you were talking, Sonia. One of the things is something that's come up a lot in my office is talking about friendships and how friendships are hard. And so talking to clients who are saying, like, gosh, this girl was so mean to me and I don't know why, and I don't know what to do. And this feels really overwhelming. And so we do that thing where we validate how hard it is and how painful it is. And then we start doing some cognitive reframing, and we might do some play therapy or some acting. And so the cognitive reframing can be so helpful to calm down that anxious part of the brain that's like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. And if I were to try to talk to her, everything will fall apart and it will be an absolute nightmare. And that's so real to that client. Like, gosh, that makes sense to me. I've felt that way before. But to be able to take that distorted thought that's not really true, like, will your life actually fall apart if you go talk to that girl again? Probably not. It's scary. It's scary that I have to go talk to this girl, but my life is not going to fall apart. It's going to be okay. So kind of shifting the thinking to think through, this problem is scary, but it's not impossible. We can try to make a change, or we can accept the fact that it's hard and move our energy and our focus to something else. And that's okay too. But to kind of think through like the distorted thoughts that make really to a kid that's not had to deal with this before can be really helpful in building resiliency and like empowering the kid. And the other thing I thought of was doing like play therapy. Like, can we act this out in a sand tray? Like, what happens if you move little figures around to kind of demonstrate the situation you're dealing with and how scary it is? And can we pick a character that represents the mean friend at school? Okay, how are you going to talk to the friend? What's going to happen? What's the worst thing you can imagine happening? Let's build that here in the sand tray with the toys. What's the best thing that could happen? And we can build that too. Or even acting out. Like if you work with kids or raising kids, I like to tell parents, like, act it out with your kid, like help them do a demonstration, have a conversation. I'll pretend that I'm the bully, you pretend to be yourself, or we can switch. What do you think is going to happen? Can kind of help children wrap their arms around the situation and kind of validate their emotions, think through what's really true here, what's a valid fear, but what's an actual true thing that could happen. And then kind of think through ways that they could approach it. Can be really tangible and hands-on. And it's cool to see teens feel a bit more confident to try and fail, and then be able to kind of accept also.
And when they're doing that role playing, they can kind of then map out, like, I feel like that would help lower anxiety automatically, because they're then being forced to think, okay, these are the possible outcomes. now
Mhm.
I'm going to be prepared for whatever outcome might actually happen. So that would be very helpful for them, especially teens. And I remember being a teenage girl and thinking that if one thing happened, my entire life, I mean, was just going to go down the drain and it was going to be terrible. And so it's like, you can relate to that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'll add, I'm a parent. So I have 4 kids and then I'm a teacher as well, but I'll say from parenting, um, as a parent, you want to help your child as much as you possibly can. You know, you want them to succeed and you want them to, um, you know, get things done the right way. So I'll even just I have a 2-year-old daughter and she needed something off the counter. And so it was my immediate reaction to like, just go get her the thing off. She asked so nicely and I'm just going to get her the thing off the counter. And my husband, was like, no, she needs to learn to do that herself, but she's 2 years old. She can't do that. I'm just going to do it. And he was like, no. And so he kind of pointed to her and he was like, Eliana, there's a stool. And then, you know, there's the stool and there's the counter. And as a mom, I'm like, I need to take care of my baby. That's not going to work. But it did. She ended up going, I mean, it took some trial and error, but she got the stool. She pushed it over. She got on the stool and she got the thing off the counter. So I think sometimes too, just allowing our children to fail or to work through things without jumping into helping them or saving them. And we do that out of love. And we do that, you know, the teacher in me does it out of love too. I love my kids and I want them to just succeed. I want to help them through. But if we don't give them the opportunities to problem solve on their own, we're really setting them up for failure. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I actually look, gosh, everything that you all have said is so good. And the key feature that I notice goes back to the word that's in the title of that book, besides the word seen, is connection. And all of the things that you all described require some form of connection with the person. You know, if a teen, for example, should problem solve and need help, they know they can get the help. There's that. And then if they realize that they know the help is available, but they were able to solve it on their own anyway, that develops this agency for themselves that they can go out and live into the real world at large in the future, but knowing that that support system still exists if they need it. And so I think that just understanding that sometimes the child or teen or young adult, all they really need to know is that they're not alone in the struggles that they're
Yeah.
trying to overcome.
Yeah.
I think that's what's great about Chesterfield Counseling too. If I can put in a little, I always pitch for us because I really love where we work, is that we have so many people here who are trained to be that for someone. And it could really be, we have young clients now who come in and they just want someone to talk to other than their parents, because their parents are subjective. And, you know, we all know that.
Yeah.
And they just want to learn how to start communicating and trusting and talking. And then we have teenagers and we have people, you know, in every phase of life, but the kind of connection you can have with someone who knows you a little bit, but automatically has an affinity for you because you're a human and you can process with, that's a life-giving encounter. And so, you know, if you're struggling with decision making or anxiety around making decisions, or if you have something in your life that's kind of heavy on you, you don't know how to solve it, if you don't have other people to process with, then, you know, by golly, connect with us. We'd love to connect you. So I know you all know that, but I just always want to say that.
No, I think that's great. Absolutely. And when we post this, I'll go ahead and put the link underneath the comments for if you want help finding a therapist or someone to talk to or help you kind of hone in on problems that are in your life or how to solve those problems. That will be linked in the comments. So I just want to thank you guys so much for sitting here with me and
Thank
talking
you.
this. I realized I forgot to introduce everybody. I realized that about halfway through, and I didn't want to then go back and be like, wait, we didn't introduce everyone. So I'm just going to run through a quick introduction now, if it's okay with you guys, just so people know who we are and why this group was gathered to have this discussion. So I'll just start with Tiffany.
Yeah. So Tiffany Wild is my name, and I'm a therapist at CCA. I'm a PLPC currently, and I would say I specialize in young adults, premarital, married, teens, women of all ages, and whether it's anxiety, depression, grief, or just the general everyday problem solving skills, something that you can certainly contact me for. My background actually is in entrepreneurship and business, and we were what I would consider professional problem solvers and in emergency ways. So the word adapt and flex became a common feature of my everyday decision-making process. So if that's something that anyone else is struggling with, you're welcome to call me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. Sonia.
Yeah, so I am a professional coach here at Chesterfield Counseling. I have a background of working with kids and with in education, but I also am the kind of go-to person for people who are struggling in relationships. So whether that's setting boundaries around addiction or mental health, whether that's someone who's struggling in their own life, I really work to help people find balance in their relationships. And I have a workshop called Boundaries in Relationships to that end.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonia. And then Jenny.
Yeah, I'm a therapist also at CCA. I'm a graduate intern, so I'm almost done with my master's degree. And I see all kinds of clients. I super love working with teens, with individuals, with couples. I love working in issues of trauma and depression, and anxiety, and spiritual abuse recovery.
All right. And I'm Alyssa Lipson. I am an elementary teacher by trade and an educational coach at CCA. And that's our panel for you guys. So thank you thank you for for sitting through this with us. And thank you to those of you who are watching. And if you have any questions or comments, you can drop them down below and we will be happy to get back to you. So
Thanks, Alyssa.